So it's no secret that Star Wars fans are obsessive. It wouldn't even be inaccurate to call the more obsessive fans religious to some extent. Just looking at this graph, for instance, from 2001, there was even a majority of people who legitimately identified as Jedi for a census. It's tempting to just throw that away to a joke or to say something is unclear because of how many people may have been joking or how many people may have been doing it as a simple protest to the question of religion. Um, it still seems like it would be stronger than any other belief they have. Like, let me ask you a question. Do you think, say, a Catholic, for instance, would write Jedi? To be honest, though, that's not even the important point about this I want to make. And that's, so what? Even if they did do it as a joke, um, or even if they were really silly about it, I still think it would be a religion. I think there's a misconception, perhaps construed from these measurement systems that we use to classify official religions, that religions have to be strict. I mean, to legally have a large definable religion, I think it would even be necessary, to be honest. I mean, then again, maybe not. I do remember I watched a video by Matt Walsh, I believe it was, who made a video about how he tried to get Sillyism defined as an official religion, kind of to raise awareness of this question, I think, and to challenge it. So I do think it can be challenged. I do think it has been challenged, but it's still an interesting question to ask nonetheless, and with Star Wars in particular. I mean, I wouldn't feel confident without going into the case studies on these things in particular, but a recurring pattern I've found with Star Wars is this sort of almost religious backlash to the changing of the text itself. And there are plenty of individual examples of this. The introduction of midichlorians, of Jar Jar, of Finn as a black stormtrooper. And I mean, I feel like that one's probably been put to bed by now, but just so we're clear, just in case there's anybody who's still upset about this, somehow, the knowledge you're using about the Clone Wars is just wrong. Yes, while it is true that the clone troopers, for instance, were all white and that the stormtroopers descended from them, the original clones themselves were phased out by the time stormtroopers came to be a thing, and especially by the time that the Disney trilogy started up so many years after the Clone Wars. But that's beside the point. I don't even know if that person exists or still making that argument anyway. My other point would be to say that these reactions happened far sooner than you might expect from even the initial release of a lot of these projects. So after sitting on this and thinking about it, I realized the most religious aspect for most people is the celebritydom of Star Wars. And what I mean by that is people who could meet people in their childhood like Luke Skywalker or George Lucas would be like meeting Jesus for a lot of other people. And the other thing that occurred to me, especially in relation to video essays and this idea of Star Wars and religion, is this idea that I kind of realized that all the smaller ideas had become as deeply significant and personal in their own way for people who do obsess over the movies and the media of Star Wars. I mean, you could literally live on it with all the weird merch out there, and I think there have been people who have taken this concept and like tried to live with only things from a certain medium, certain merchandise or products. It's certainly fascinating, if not a little off topic. And I mean, there's even a large competitive edge, even to just my own sort of medium of video essays. It's just as academics have, tried to clash against each other, people who play sports, there's a clash and need to be better or best. I think the same thing can happen even just from an artistic standpoint in video essays. And I think that's kind of skyrocketed around Star Wars. I mean, there are hour-long videos that are like, not only am I right, but you're wrong, and if that's not competitive, then I don't really know what is. This video essay really started to get away from me. I had to go and sit back and then come back to this. And I think my first thought coming back is that there's more to this than I previously thought. And I think there's a specific reason why the Disney films failed, where the other ones succeeded. And I think, in a way, the strengths of previous films only detracted from the sequels in what they failed to carry over from those films. And what brought me to this thought is just this idea that these films were always ridiculous. I think the best word I can use is far-fetched, actually. Like, a good example of this is you take the original trilogy. Luke Skywalker starts the movie as just a farm boy and a farmhand and ends a trained, expert X-Wing pilot able to pull off an impossible shot with use of the Force. And it's campy, and it's kind of like, oh, well, it's just a movie, and he needed to do it. And there will be fans that are, like, slamming their keyboard right now and, like, screaming, like, no, there's, like, specific reasons. They showed in the film, look, he wanted to be a pilot, and he wanted to do this and that, because he was playing with the X-Wing toy, and he was talking about going to school, and it's like, it's not completely out there. And there's this idea that if we can justify things later with logic that we didn't notice in the past when we watched these films, they were these sort of underlying currents of the film that made it great in some, like, almost unconscious way. Like, if they were not there, we at the time would have processed them differently and regarded them differently. I mean, people like me, people who enjoyed Star Wars as children and have gone down some sort of path of writing, some sort of interest in writing, either professionally or even just as a hobby, or people, even just people who enjoy the nature of storytelling and watch all these videos about it. We all sort of come to this understanding that these properties were great, that we love, and that if we love them, we should be able to defend them in some intellectual manner. Something that had such emotional weight from our childhood has to have equal intellectual depth to be sort of perfect for us, and we strive for that. And I really do think we see a bias here where the mistakes of previous films are mistakes, and the mistakes of the newer films, such as the Disney trilogy, are endemic of some sort of larger misunderstanding of what Star Wars was. And that sort of brings me to one of the largest critiques I've seen levied at Disney from sort of all sides of the fan base, and that's this need for money and marketing. So really, you have this dichotomy being created where a lot of people are saying, well, the Disney trilogy was doomed to fail because it was made to make money, and the original trilogy was made purely for passion, and therefore it could not fail. The conundrum I'm trying to work through in this situation is that that's not the story of Star Wars. Because the story of Star Wars is that George Lucas got his cake, and he got to eat it too. I'll link it in the description, but there's this video of George Lucas talking to Oprah Winfrey about the beginnings of Star Wars, and specifically how he made it successful. Because Star Wars wasn't his first movie, or even his first movie where he had some moderate success, like with American Graffiti. But as he says, unlike that movie, which took maybe 3 weeks to write, he spent 2 years writing Star Wars, and always to some extent saw it as an investment. And I think what looking at the story deeper tells us is that what made Star Wars revolutionary, as much as its story, was its marketing. So marketing as advertisement didn't really work in the realm of movies when George Lucas first came about making Star Wars. And he did it to solve the problem that he didn't think studios would want to advertise his weird movie. And he turned down the money to retain his licensing rights, in part because, as owner of the property, he would be able to make the other movies that Star Wars itself necessitated. I suppose my sort of point in bringing all this up is that Star Wars has always been very closely tied to not only its marketing strategies, but um, just capital in general. Even Return of the Jedi, for instance, was altered, especially the ending, to reflect the fact that there was going to be merchandising of the action figures. There was a falling out between George Lucas and another screenwriter that I can get into perhaps on a later video, but it boils down to a difference of opinion on the ending where Han Solo, for instance, was initially supposed to die, and Luke Skywalker was supposed to turn to the dark side. But we got the happy ending instead, in part to sell the action figures and to build up the brand. And it worked. Star Wars, in my opinion, simply wouldn't be the behemoth it was today if there wasn't that consideration for merchandising this popping up of an ultimate good or evil that a lot of people could get behind and sort of idolize, I would say. I mean, if you see the amount of money that obsessive Star Wars fans will spend on merchandise, it's clear to me that there's some sort of idolatry going on that is tied into the series, that's baked into people's love of Star Wars. And without said merchandising and consideration, I don't think people's love of Star Wars would be quite as strong or fanatic as it is today. And that just puts me at a weird place trying to understand the new trilogy.